It wasn't the look on the officer's face that stopped Maya in her tracks. It was the taser in his hand, aimed squarely at her. The hallway buzzed with muted whispers, every pair of eyes glued to the scene unfolding like something out of a nightmare. Maya's breath caught in her throat. What had she done wrong? She was just walking to class. But before she could process, the officer barked again. His voice sharp and final. "Hands where I can see them." Her heart raced as she clutched her backpack tighter, her fingers trembling. Around her, classmates froze, some recording on their phones, others exchanging uneasy glances. This wasn't just fear. It was humiliation painted across her face for everyone to see. Maya's voice broke as she finally managed. "I didn't do anything," but the words felt weightless against the force of the officer's grip as he yanked her toward the cold metal lockers. And then she saw him, her father, James Carter, standing at the end of the hallway. His calm demeanor hid a storm of controlled rage that Maya had never seen before. As he approached, the room seemed to shift. The weight of his presence silenced the murmurs. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, his voice low and sharp. The officer didn't flinch until James pulled out his badge. This wasn't just any father. This was an FBI agent. And what he did next would leave the entire town reeling. The question wasn't if justice would be served, but how far a father would go to protect his daughter. Stay tuned to Real Life Stories New, where we dive into the moments that test our courage, challenge our beliefs, and inspire change. This story is just getting started. Maya Carter stood frozen, her wrists still burning from the handcuffs, as her father's words sliced through the tense hallway. "Take them off now." The officer hesitated, his bravado cracking under the weight of James Carter's unwavering stare. It wasn't just the badge James had revealed. It was the quiet, searing authority of a man who had spent his career taking down those who believed they were untouchable. As the cuffs fell away with a metallic click, Maya rubbed her wrists, a faint tremble in her hands. The humiliation of being paraded through the school hallway in front of her peers clung to her like a second skin. Her father's calm exterior did little to mask the fury simmering beneath. James leaned in closer to the officer, his voice low enough for only him to hear. "You've just made the biggest mistake of your career, and I'll make sure you never forget it." The car ride home was silent. Maya stared out the window, her reflection a blur against the passing trees. She wanted to ask her father what would happen next, but the tight grip he had on the steering wheel spoke louder than words. It wasn't until they were home, the door closing softly behind them, that she finally broke the silence. "What now?" James turned to face her, his jaw tight. "Now we fight." The next morning, James sat at the dining table, his laptop open and a growing stack of files beside him. Maya hesitated in the doorway, watching. He scrolled through emails and reviewed documents. She could see the lines of tension etched into his face, but there was also something else, a quiet determination that seemed unshakable. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked, stepping closer. James looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "Because this isn't just about you, Maya. It's about every kid who's ever been made to feel powerless. And because no one, gets to treat my daughter that way." Maya wanted to believe him, but the weight of what had happened still clung to her chest. What if it doesn't change anything? What if it just makes things worse? James stood, resting a hand on her shoulder. "Then we keep going until it does." The tension came to a head at the school board meeting later that week. Maya sat in the front row, her father's reassuring presence behind her, as the murmurs of the packed room filled the air. When her name was called, she stood, her legs unsteady but her resolve firm, as she walked to the podium. The whispers quieted, and all eyes turned to her. "My name is Maya Carter," she began, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach, "and I refuse to stay silent." She spoke about what had happened, not just the humiliation but the fear and the injustice. She described how it felt to be treated like a criminal in a place that was supposed to protect her. As she continued, her voice grew stronger, her words cutting through the room like a blade. "This isn't just about me," she said, looking directly at the board members. "This is about a system that allows people like him to think they can get away with it. And it's about making sure no one else has to feel the way I did. When she stepped back from the podium, the room erupted into applause. James watched, pride swelling in his chest, as Maya returned to her seat. For the first time since that day, she looked like she could breathe again. But the fight was far from over. In the days that followed, James worked tirelessly, pushing for accountability and change. He met with lawyers, filed reports, and confronted the systems that had allowed this to happen. Each step was a battle, but James was relentless. One afternoon, Maya found him at his desk, poring over a thick folder of complaints and evidence. "What's all this?" she asked, sitting down across from him. "Everything Bradley's done, every report that was ignored, every family that stayed silent because they thought no one would listen," James replied, his voice heavy. "We're going to make sure they hear us now." Maya nodded, her resolve hardening. "I want to help." James paused, looking at her. "Are you sure?" "Yes," she said firmly. "If we don't stand up now, who will?" Later that week, James faced Bradley again. This time, in a dimly lit room at the precinct, the officer sat across from him. His confidence from before replaced by a thin veneer of defiance. James slid a folder across the table, its contents spilling out like a dam breaking. "This is everything," James said, his voice cold and deliberate. "Every person you thought you could intimidate, every family you thought wouldn't fight back, it's all here, and it's not going away." Bradley's face paled as he flipped through the pages, his hands trembling. "You don't understand," he stammered. "I made a mistake." "No," James interrupted, his voice sharp. "A mistake is forgetting someone's name. What you did was a choice. And now you're going to live with the consequences." Maya watched the news that evening, the headlines flashing across the screen. "Officer suspended following student incident." It wasn't enough, not yet, but it was a start. She glanced at her father, who was sitting beside her, his expression unreadable. "Do you think it'll ever be enough?" she asked quietly. James exhaled, his gaze steady. "It has to be." Maya stood on the porch, watching the sunset cast warm hues across the horizon. The weight of the past week still lingered, but something inside her had shifted. She no longer felt defined by the fear and humiliation of that day. Instead, she felt a spark of determination, one that refused to be extinguished. Her father joined her, the quiet between them filled with unspoken understanding. "Do you think it'll ever really change?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James looked at her, his gaze steady. "It already has, Maya. Maybe not everywhere, maybe not for everyone, but it starts with moments like this, with people like you who refuse to stay silent." Maya smiled faintly, her reflection of hope mingling with resolve. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing. She wouldn't let fear define her story. Together, they had confronted injustice, and while the road ahead was long, it was one they were ready to walk. As the first stars dotted the sky, Maya turned to her father. "We're not done, are we?" James shook his head. "Not even close. If Maya's story moved you, let it inspire action. Share this video, like, and subscribe to Real Life Stories New as we strive to reach 10,000 subscribers. Together we can amplify voices, create change, and remind the world that courage starts with one step forward. Thank you for being part of this journey.